Right, here we go. Clap one on three. 1, 2, 3. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash. And as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the mostess, Christy Oxborrow. How you feeling?
Doing great.
Fantastic.
Excited to be here.
I got a confession. This is the second week in a row I feel like I'm starting with a confession, but it's nowhere near the same as the last one.
I like the idea that this has become a confessional booth. I like that a lot.
I'm just needing you to prescribe me a certain amount of Hail Marys and Our Fathers or whatever it is. Our Fathers? Doesn't matter. I don't
Lucky
know.
for you, mine would be nugs and soft serve.
Well, then count me in for sin, because if my penance is having to eat soft serve and nugs, good Lord.
Count me in for sin should be cross stitch on a pillow. Just
Count
FYI.
me in for sin. You're right. Sometimes I don't even realize the gold that has come out of my mouth.
Don't worry. I try to catch as much of it as I can.
Thank you so much. Panning for gold. Last night. Now, this first thing, and I want to preface this by saying, don't come for my sweet boyfriend. He's a good man. He's a good man. Okay? He perhaps had never viewed Wayne's World.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. He was familiar with it. He had seen parts of it, but he's like, I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. So, look,
Okay.
if there's a gift I can give, it's facilitating that. Shout out to fellow Canadian Mike Myers, obviously. And I got to say, watching it too, there are moments where I'm like, oh, it's the tender sounds of like a classic Canadian accent. Do you know what I mean? Because
Oh,
I
sure.
never viewed Canadians as having an accent until I moved somewhere else, got indoctrinated with talking another way. And then I listened to it and I love it. It feels like home. It sounds like
nice.
home to me.
To me.
So we're watching Wayne's World, and I had this moment because I don't know if you all know this or not, but I have been dabbling in the rock and roll arts. And for the first time, I went, oh my God, I've always assumed that Tia Carrere is really singing. But why would I assume that? I work in film and television.
I don't know.
I know that so often people have their voices have a singer. Oh,
Sure.
so foolish. And I'm watching it the whole time going, God, she sells it so well. So I guess that's why I always fell for it. Always fell for it. Long story short, too late. My apologies, Ms. Carrere. She absolutely sang every goddamn note.
For her.
She sang every note. She sang the soundtrack. How dare I doubt her? She's a treasure.
First of all, agreed. Second of all, how dare you? I always assumed it wasn't really her.
It's her.
Because
It's
again,
her.
I just assumed in movies, if it's somebody on screen and then they start singing, it's not their singing voice. They did it with Simba. I love that I chose a cartoon.
Of course. Of course.
A damn cartoon.
Well, it's a fair
Anytime he was
example.
on the screen, they got somebody on there. I mean, that wasn't Jonathan Taylor Thomas's singing voice when
No.
he was the prince or whatever. I can't wait to be king. That's the song I was thinking of. But good for her.
Yeah, she started out as a singer.
No kidding.
Yeah. I listen, let me tell you a little something. I've been on a full Tia Carrere education for the last 12 hours. As I 24 hours. My math is all off. That doesn't matter, Lauren. The amount of time doesn't matter. That is superfluous to the story. The point is that yeah, no, she absolutely was singing, and that's why it came off. She sold it so well. Spoiler alert, because it's her. Because it's her own voice. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
My favorite Barbie I had growing up, I always thought looked like Tia Carrere.
Oh, yeah, God, she's gorgeous. I will also say this. She had gotten a callback for a Baywatch storyline.
Hey.
Where she was going to be playing David Hasselhoff's character's marine biologist girlfriend.
Yep. That checks out.
she apparently had to go for another swim test, and I was like, "I love that they gave them swim tests." I mean, the idea that I, as an actor, would have to do a swim test to get a role is my biggest nightmare
Oh,
known to man.
sure.
I don't I mean,
Yeah.
I can keep myself going. I can swim a little, but, like, I'm not gonna pass a test. No way.
Oh, yeah. If the test is stay alive, I could pass that. But
We
that's
were we were,
about it.
when we flew to the Bahamas, we stopped, in Miami, which is where my boyfriend is from. So we
Sure.
stopped there for a couple days. We were on Miami Beach, and I was like, and I was the one that was like, "Let's get in the ocean. Let's feel the ocean." I always feel very, like, emotionally moved by the ocean. Anyway, I was like, "It's a little windy, no problem, kind of a few waves, no big deal." It was downright choppy. We got thrown around in that ocean. I mean, now listen, he's a big guy and he's a good swimmer, so I was fine. But I was hanging on. I'll say that. I was absolutely hanging on to him.
Sure.
We got out. I collapsed into a beach chair, full vertigo. It took
Mhm.
me like 20 minutes to be able to speak again. All I said was room. We then went to the hotel room. I threw up. It was anyway, it was a
Oh,
total yeah. So spoiler alert. Yeah, would I say I'm great in the ocean? Maybe not. But to my point, I'm not passing any swimming tests. Anyway, long story short, way too late. I've deviated so far away. She got the Wayne's World script at that time. And the way the story is seems to be being told is that she ended up choosing Wayne's World over the Baywatch storyline. And I say, thank you, Tia. We're all better for it.
for her.
Yeah.
Oh, good for her. She made the right choice.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine Wayne's World without her in it?
Not even
Not even
close.
close.
Now, did she put out any albums before or after?
I'm so glad you asked, Christy Lynn, because I have an answer for you. Yes,
Let's
she
see what
did.
you would.
She did.
Hey.
So she's she has Pacific Islander, Chinese, she's I believe Spanish, she's of many different backgrounds, but she grew up in Hawaii. And
Oh,
so she
sure.
talked about how she thought the best she could ever possibly do is probably end up singing at a hotel in Waikiki. That was one of her quotes. She thought that was the furthest she would ever get. So after Wayne's World, I guess she put out a pop song, may have been an album. I can't remember if it was just a single or an album. But I don't think it did very well. I think people expected her to do rock music because she was such a powerhouse in Wayne's World, and she did something that was
Sure.
more poppy because that was more to her taste. And so then she went back to Hawaii to work with this guy that she had known, and they've put out multiple albums, and I believe have won Grammys for best Hawaiian music, best Hawaiian albums.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. I also think this was the first time you've used my middle name on the show, when you're not shocked or mad at me. It was the first time it was used in a positive way.
You're right. You're right. I just
So
really wanted to grab you. You know what I mean? Like, I really wanted to get your attention, and I knew that would do it.
it did.
Yeah.
It did. Wow. I mean, I'm gonna have to immediately find all of this,
Yeah.
uh, just to give it a listen.
Yeah, great point. I have not pulled up, the tunes yet, but I'm gonna have to give them some streams, give some love to Ms. Carrere.
Thank you
Obsessed with
for
her,
the
and I never knew it.
tunes.
You know what I mean?
Oh, how can you not be?
Yeah.
How can you
Yeah.
not be?
Then so next on our list, spoiler alert, is Wayne's World 2. And because here's the thing, I also like Wayne's World 2. I think Wayne's World is obviously a classic, it's
Of
iconic, it's all of the
course.
above. I think Wayne's World 2 is a completely different thing. It is such a different feel to me.
Yes.
It's almost like you can't compare them to me. Um,
Sure.
anyway, but then what we were discussing, which is unrelated to everything I've just said, I'm really ADHDing today, isn't it fascinating that Rob Lowe plays the bad guy in Wayne's World and also in Tommy Boy?
Oh, sure.
He was really, and I believe it felt like
Mhm.
even similar wardrobe. Like it felt like,
Oh, it's like he left one set, drove across town, and went on the other set. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has that in him. Um, just like he just instantly you look at him and you're like, "Oh, he's a bad guy." But
Yeah.
he played an over the top, like, golden retriever, pleasant man on, Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
So, I
I
mean, I
bet
guess
you
chameleon.
there you go. I bet you it was probably appealing to him.
Oh, sure.
to do a comedy where he
He's
was a good
actually
guy.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, where he's not a complete schmuck. Yeah. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
bet
it's
that was
like,
to
for example, if, I don't know, a nameless actress that may co-host a successful True Crime and Cocktails podcast perhaps was offered a role where she wasn't, what some would describe as a ball buster, that she wasn't described as overly tough or
mm,
bitchy, something, a role that maybe made her feel like, she has range, I'm totally kidding. I know I have
mm.
range. No, I would love to get offered something that's like a complete 180. That's like super
Of course.
nervous and mousy. That sounds fun to me because that's not typically what I get cast in,
I'd love to see that for you.
right?
Yes. I have
I
to
don't know what it's gonna
say,
take.
um, speaking of that, actress, who we didn't specifically name,
Of course, thank you.
um, I'm still cackling at Woofs and Catters.
Thank you very
I
much.
I would like you to know that. There was also a moment, um, where that actress, uh, did this like, "Yeah," and I turned to my husband and I went, "I've seen that in real life."
Well, some
Oh,
fun facts for you about that actress in that episode of that show, Not Dead Yet.
yeah.
That episode was directed by, I'll say it, friend of the podcast, Melissa Fumero.
Oh, nice.
Delight.
Nice.
Um, and we the Scream was one that had to get shot a very specific way.
Sure.
And so I did that Scream, excuse me, the actress in question I've heard did that Scream just so many times. Just so
Of
many times.
course.
And listen, it was totally fine, no problem. But those are the things that you obviously we forget when we watch these things that it's like, wow, how many screams? How many screams does it take to get to the center of the oh, it's bad tonight. It's bad. I'm all over the fucking place.
Oh,
Uh
I couldn't be happier.
oh good lord. But yes, that the Wolves and Gathers storyline, the line where it's like, I've hit a snag. Roll it turns out dogs can't roll dice. That did make me laugh when I read it in
Oh,
the
yeah.
script. I thought that was very funny.
Oh, I also enjoyed the, "Oh, just get them to, use a spinner. Where were you 6 hours ago?" Yeah,
Yeah.
what a pure delight. Also, there's a voice that that actress,
Yes.
did when holding the little dog thing. It was almost how you talk for Bean,
Yeah.
which I could not have loved more. Um, and then I was like, "You know what? I wanna build a buzz, a single person building a buzz, usually not
Please.
how it works." So I went, on Twitter and I was like, "Well, I'm gonna tweet at ABC until they hate me."
Yeah.
Be like, "I'm trying to manifest season 3." But then I was like, pump the brakes. I don't wanna do it from even though I'm the one that tweets from our account,
Of course.
I don't want them to look at it and then, heaven forbid, click on it and be like, "So Lauren's doing this." Even if I say it's me, I don't want someone to be like, "She's pretending," whatever. So I'm like, I'll do it
Right.
from my other one. Well, my other account I've barely touched, and I learned that Twitter, because I call it nothing else,
Mhm.
um, I went to tweet through it, and it was like, "Oh, actually, before we're gonna let you do that, you actually have to interact with other people first, just so we know you're real." I was like, "Damn, alright." So, instead of interacting, I w I went to Instagram and said, "Fuck that, I'll just try another approach." So I went to Instagram, and then again, I had the same thing where I was like, "Oh, I don't wanna use our thing because I don't want them to think it's you in disguise."
Right.
And so I was like, "Oh, forget it." So I used my other account, and I went on to the Not Dead Yet, and I found a thing, and I was just like, because I like all the posts, and then I, went on the one of the newer posts, and I was just like, "Hey," and I tagged ABC, and I was like, Just manifesting a season 3. If I have to post that on every post, I will do that."
God bless you. Yeah, listen, you and me both, baby. I appreciate
Yeah.
you giving me, the break that it's not gonna look like it's coming from me, but yes, everyone shout it from the rooftops. Let's get season 3 of Not Dead Yet picked up. What's the holdup?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, I get that. we need to know what's going to happen.
We need to know. We need to know. It can't end there.
No. No, we need to see.
We're just getting started, baby.
Yeah. We need to see what's going to happen with So Cool. Although, what was it about the ooze? It's the ooze make it fun or something.
Yeah.
What was oh fuck. I just wish they'd really put up those billboards with
I know.
you all over the place with the sunglasses. I mean, get out of town.
I mean, that
I
would
would live for
be
that.
a great way to start promoting season 3.
Yes,
Just put
because
up
we're
those
just gonna keep saying season 3.
right. Because again, the show is set in Pasadena, which is, of course, in the Los Angeles area. So let's get those billboards up. Why not?
Yeah. Oh, this Pasadena? I can try. Yeah. Yeah.
You got a lot of these lines in your
Look,
in your noggin.
it's
I appreciate that.
it's fresh. It's
I love
fresh,
it.
and I'm a fan of the program.
Thank
So if
you.
you ever run into that actress,
Of course, I'll pass it
you know,
along.
thank you so much. That would be
We'll
great.
pass it along.
That'd be so great.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Count me
I
in for sin.
again, cross-stitched on a pillow.
Yeah.
That should sit on my couch 100%. I have no cross-stitched pillows. I don't know why I think that I should get any, but it doesn't matter. Um, so you mentioned Tia Carrere and music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard a song on the radio coming home today, and I just want your opinion.
Okay.
Now, I'm talking the song Into Club by 50 Cent.
Okay.
Now, is it the stellar bop that I think it is? Or is it just pure nostalgia? The second it comes on, I'm mentally transported back to another point in my life.
I think I might have to pull it up right now
Okay.
and give you a in the moment. Is this a good song?
Because every time I hear it, I mean, this shorty is incredibly happy.
Solid bop.
Right?
Yes.
Every time I
only had
hear
to
it,
listen
I'm
to
like,
3 seconds.
yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It moves.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I got thinking about it. And I'm like, do I know the words? I learned I don't. For
Oh, I certainly
example,
don't.
um, uh, I mean, yeah, you find me in the club, all of this. Um, so come give me a hug if you're into getting rubbed.
Oh,
Now, when did this song come out? Does this say when it came out? I can't believe it doesn't say when it came out. This song easily came out in the early 2000s, right?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gun to my head. I would have told you for the last 20 plus years that line was, so come give me a hug if you're into getting rough. So for over 20 years, that's what I've been singing. Turns
Wow.
out the answer is rubbed. Now I feel worse about having it cranked in the car with my children in it.
Well,
Um, I
oh,
just,
you'll love I pearl clutched at. I'm into having sex. I ain't into making love. I pearl clutched.
oh, that was one of my favorite lines. It made me feel like a real badass. Again, ah,
Wow.
I mean, some of these lyrics are pearl clutching.
Yeah. I
I
love
mean,
the one that really got me ultimately fairly benign. But apparently I'm again,
well,
the older I get.
this is also the woman that thought it was saying if you want to get rough, but
I'm
he's been
also just
saying getting rubbed this
I'm
whole
also gonna
time.
just put this out there. There's some
Yeah.
problematic things in here.
Oh yeah. Well,
When I
that
said it
shows
was
the
a
time.
certified bop, I was going solely by the beat.
Oh
Slowly by the
yeah.
beat.
We're
I had
talking
no idea what the lyrics were to
musically.
this song.
We're not talking lyrically. Now,
No.
again, I thought that maybe if you just search it, oh, got right the radio edit. I just want to know, when did it release?
Mm,
Here we go. Oh my God, 2003. I mean, sure.
I was 20.
I mean, this makes so much sense, um, for who I was mentally at the time. I will also say, I think without realizing it, I may have been attracted to 50 Cent.
Oh God, yeah.
He has an energy. I
I
mean,
think he
just don't
dated
read the
Chase.
lyrics and you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. I think he dated Chelsea Handler, didn't he?
Did he?
Yeah,
What was that couch banter?
right.
Oh, I'm fascinated by that. Well, who else did he
Mm-hmm.
date? I'm actually looking up 50 Cent dating history. I mean, at some point, we're gonna have to just do a show where it's literally just us telling them what we're Googling. So he also, dated Sierra,
Ah, okay.
and yeah, Chelsea Handler's on the list. Paris Hilton? I don't think so. Really?
Hmm.
Vivica A. Fox? Nia Long? How am I shocked by these? A complete timeline of his history. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Ah.
2011, she said, I dated 50 Cent very casually. But I think they dated again.
Oh, sure. 2003, he dated Vivica A. Fox when he was just like becoming famous.
Also in 2020,
Good for
Chelsea
him.
Handler offered to pay 50 Cent's tax bill if he voted for Joe Biden, as he had pledged to vote for President Trump.
Oh my.
I offer that with no comment. Just giving you the information as I read it.
I mean, this is saying in 2008 and 2009, there were rumors on the street that 50 Cent had been in a relationship with Paris Hilton. For some reason, I just don't buy it. But
I don't trust
yeah,
that.
he dated Chelsea Handler in 2010.
Listen, a certain actress that we know was recently on a TV show, Chelsea Handler. Lovely human.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
That's nice.
there you go.
I was quickly trying to think of a way to throw in a line about getting the last shrimp, but that's even more quotes from the show.
I mean, again, I'm impressed by your commitment to our dialogue
Oh, of
or my
course.
dialogue, I guess.
I mean, let's call it like it is. Obviously, that actress, my favorite character. So
Yeah.
I'm always a little too intently watching, waiting for just like a little bit of her to peek out. That I'm like, there it is. I've heard
Yep.
that exact tone you know, in a
Oh yeah.
conversation we've had. So it's like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I'm there.
Well, I respect it. Now listen, what you drinking over there? You got a Slurpee on the go?
I do, because I was already out because I was dealing with kid sports because 'tis the time of year. Um, so I did grab a Slurpee, and a, water on the way home. And while I'm at it, while I was out earlier at a child sport, I got to meet the lovely Danielle. So I'm just gonna shout out Danielle. Um, she stopped me. We had a hello. We apparently have a similar love of Slurpees. So
Beautiful. Oh
yeah,
shit. Sorry, Sharky, of course, is laying on the table, and he just almost knocked over two of my three beverages. So
that checks.
everything's going as it's meant to. Yeah, I got a water, I got a Diet Coke, and I got a tangerine high noon.
Hey, I always like when you have a variety.
I
You
like
know
to
what I
keep it wild. I was gonna say keep it simple, but then I was like, 3 drinks is not simple. Keep them
True.
guessing. Now listen, this week we're talking the case of Stacey Thorne. Now, this is not a case I'm familiar with, and if you aren't
Hey.
also, do not worry, because as always, Christy has written us a synopsis to get us up to speed right now. In 2007, 35-year-old Stacey Thorne was fatally stabbed in her own home. Less than a week later, police arrested Stacey's lover, Scott Ostick, for the crime. In fact, police were able to find multiple pieces of evidence that made Scott's conviction a slam dunk. But several years later, a forensic expert noticed some inconsistencies with that very evidence. So, what's the deal with the evidence? Was Scott Ostick actually framed? And if Scott didn't kill Stacey Thorne, then who did? Christy Oxborrow investigates.
Yeah, we're heading down under
We're
for
heading
this one.
down under.
We're heading down under for this one.
Beautiful.
Specifically Western Australia, which according to my notes, I don't believe we've done a case based there before. So, you know. So disclaimer, as always, this episode will contain mentions of abortion, so trigger warning for those who need it.
Beautiful.
Stacey Robin Thorne was born May 1st, 1972, to David and Susan Thorne. She was one of six siblings, raised in Bonington, a small mining town 120 kilometers southeast of Perth in Western Australia. Stacey was a teacher's aide and an Aboriginal liaison officer at a local school. She loved her job. She was extremely close with her family. Stacey was described as easygoing, honest, respectable, smart, and a heart of gold. In early December 2007, Stacey found out, or not, she didn't found out. At that point, she was a few months pregnant. She was looking forward to becoming a mother. The baby's father was a quiet, private man named Scott Ostick. Since Boddington is a very small town, Scott and Stacey grew up together. In fact, their younger brothers were actually best friends. Scott said, quote, "We've been friends our entire lives. We'd always been close to the Thorne family." Scott finished school at the age of 15 and went to work as an assistant mechanic at the local bauxite mine. In the late 90s, Scott moved in with his girlfriend Jody, and they had two daughters, Heidi and Sky. They broke up in 2006 when their oldest daughter was about 4 or 5 years old. Soon after the breakup, Scott casually started seeing Stacey. It is said that they saw each other about once or twice a week over the span of about 18 months. The timeline math ain't mathin'. Side note.
I love this.
So, Scott claimed that he started seeing Stacey about a year after his relationship with Jody ended, and he was with Stacey for 18 months. Now, Scott also stated in a documentary that he and Jody broke up in 2006. Now, if he waited a year before seeing Stacey, that would mean he didn't start anything until some point in 2007. But by December 2007, Scott claims he'd been with Stacey for 18 months. And as the title of this side note implies, that math ain't mathin'.
Yeah, it's not.
Does this specific information matter? Not really. I just like when dates and times are precise when it comes to building a timeline. Is it possible that Scott simply misspoke at some point and got confused about dates? Sure. It's also possible the relationships overlapped a bit and he's now trying to save face. I don't know. I only bring this up because inconsistencies bother me, and especially when all I want to do is try and be as accurate as possible. Since it was a casual relationship, both Scott and Stacey decided to keep it quiet. So while Stacey's sisters knew that she was seeing Scott, Stacey never really talked about him. She did, however, talk about how full on excited she was about being pregnant. Now, as I mentioned before, Boddington is a small place with a population around 2,000. It's small enough that there are 3 local police officers. And it's small enough that Scott and Stacey lived about 350 meters apart. Stacey lived in a house on Hill Street, while Scott lived in a share house on Hotham Avenue. Between their houses was a large paddock that was mostly just dirt with very little vegetation. I bring that up because that will be important momentarily. So, December 9th, 2007 was a particularly hot day in Boddington, because, of course, in Australia, that's their summer,
Right.
which is always confusing to me, but it doesn't matter. I'm Canadian. It's always cold. So to me, the concept of it being hot in December, I mean, I would love it. I'm just saying.
Of course.
So it's a beautiful day. So Stacy's family had a barbecue in the afternoon, and by early evening, Stacy headed home. Scott spent the morning doing chores, and the afternoon he was drinking and swimming in the pool with his housemate Craig. During that like afternoon of swimming and just like hanging out, Scott said he consumed 10 beers. At some point in the afternoon, Scott called Stacy to say he might stop by her place later that night. Around 5 p.m., Scott made his way to the pub at Boddington Hotel, which is about a 10-minute walk from his house. Scott had a couple of bourbons, and when he went to order another round at like 7 p.m., he was refused service. He wasn't being rude or violent in any way, but he was clearly inebriated enough that the bartender stopped serving him. Scott left the pub around 7:15 and walked to Stacy's house where, according to Scott, they had a chat, had sex, had another chat, and he left. According to Scott's housemates, Scott arrived home while they were watching a movie around 9:30 p.m. Scott and Craig then had a brief chat outside, and everyone in the house went to bed around 10:30. Sometime between 10:20 and 10:30, someone entered Stacy's home and stabbed her 21 times in what police described as a frenzied attack. Now, Stacy suffered wounds to her hands, shoulder, armpits, back, right breast, and face. Stacy then stumbled from her home down the street, screaming for help. She managed to make it about 100 meters, where she collapsed on the front lawn of number 9 Hill Street, and then she died in the homeowner's arms around 10:45.
Oh, God.
Stacey Thorne was 35 years old and 22 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. 2 000 calls, which is like Australia's 911, were placed at 11:12 and 11:19 p.m. Police arrived on scene at 11:30. I have questions as to why it took nearly 30 minutes to place the first call for help, but I couldn't find any answers. Um,
Yeah.
and sadly, Stacy's sister Brenda, who was her next door neighbor at the time, wasn't home that evening. So she has an intense amount of guilt over that, which, I mean, I understand, but also I wish she wouldn't because it wasn't her fault.
Yeah.
So since Boddington had such a small police force, the investigation was conducted by officers from the Peel District Police Office, as well as members of the Western Australia Police Major Crime Squad and Forensic Division. The following morning at 5:45 a.m., the police arrived at Scott's house to ask him about his whereabouts the night before. The police then revealed that Stacy had been murdered. The officer noted that Scott didn't seem to show any emotion at this shocking reveal. Scott later said, quote, "I was upset in my own way." So it will come as no surprise, the police quickly focused on Scott
Yeah.
as a suspect. When Scott was first questioned at the police station, he said he didn't need a lawyer because he wasn't guilty of anything. And let that be a lesson to everyone listening. When dealing with the police, immediately get a lawyer. It's not about whether or not you are guilty, it's about protecting you legally. So if you take anything away from this episode, let it be that you should always ask for a lawyer and never let them make you go, I don't need a lawyer. They're right.
Nope.
Because they're always going to tell you, oh, you need a lawyer because you did something wrong. And it's like,
And
no,
you know
no,
what
no,
you
no, no.
respond? Lawyer. Only word that needs to come out of your mouth. Lawyer.
100%.
Period.
I really feel like we're doing good work here.
I'm very passionate about it.
Of course. Well, and I mean, and hopefully by the end of this, they will be too when they see the ride this one takes.
I bet.
So, while being questioned, Scott admitted to having a casual relationship with Stacey, but he denied any knowledge of her being pregnant. Mhm. Then police pointed out that just 10 days before Stacey's death, Scott sent her a text message that read, and I quote, I will do anything for you to not have it. Just please let me know. Please, Stacey, anything. Obviously, he was caught because he obviously absolutely knew about that baby.
Yeah.
So Scott admitted he knew about the baby and that he asked her to get an abortion because he claims his ex girlfriend told him she would refuse him access to his daughters if Stacy were to have his baby. When Stacy said no to an abortion, Scott then sent that desperate text, which he told police was, quote, just a text message. It wasn't anything harsh. I was just telling her my point of view. And look, Scott, I know it's innocent until proven guilty, but begging your pregnant lover to get an abortion is not a great look, bud. And despite what you think, sir, it absolutely is a harsh thing to say to a woman, especially the woman carrying your baby. Um, so now police have Scott lying to them about the pregnancy and a text message, which kind of gives a pretty strong motive. Then police asked Scott what clothing he was wearing the night before, and when he told them, they said they had CCTV footage from the pub showing Scott in a completely different outfit. In Scott's defense, he spent most of Sunday consuming alcohol and was likely still a bit drunk when the police arrived at his door at 6 a.m. on Monday. Scott said he simply forgot that he had changed before heading to the pub. However, when police searched Scott's house, they discovered burnt clothing in the fireplace or wood heater. It led them to believe that Scott had tried to get rid of evidence of the crime. And then, during a final sweep at Scott's house, a detective discovered a packet of Winfield Blue cigarettes on a table on the back veranda. The packet had two stains on it, which appeared to be dried blood. At Stacy's house, investigators discovered blood streaks on the walls in Stacy's bedroom, bloody footprints throughout the house, and pools of blood on the floor that led from the bedroom to the front door and then continued in a trail to the spot where Stacy collapsed. During a search, police discovered an empty can of Jim Beam on the road about 20 meters north of Stacy's letterbox. Jim Beam, of course, is a bourbon, which also happens to be Scott's drink of choice.
Mm.
In fact, while at the pub hours before Stacy's death, Scott was seen on CCTV footage standing around drinking from a can of Jim Beam. During a separate search, police discovered an Excalibur brand folding pocket knife in the paddock between Scott's and Stacy's houses. It contained traces of blood, and since Stacy was stabbed, police immediately believed that this knife was likely the murder weapon. On December 14th, less than a week after the crime, Scott was arrested and charged with the willful murder of Stacey Thorne. He was denied bail and remanded to a local prison where he spent nearly 2 years awaiting trial. Scott's trial officially started in March 2009. Based on the evidence collected, the prosecution alleged that after leaving the pub, Scott went to Stacy's house, and after having sex, he returned home. Around 10:30, they say Scott grabbed a can of Jim Beam and headed back to Stacy's, where he confronted her about the baby and then stabbed her. Scott then returned home, dropping the murder weapon in the paddock along the way. When he arrived home, Scott allegedly smoked a cigarette on his back veranda before having a shower and burning his clothes. And that's all a great story. Um, but what about actual evidence proving that any of that is true? Well, the Jim Beam can found near Stacy's home was tested and found to have Scott's DNA on the mouth of the can and two of his fingerprints on the side. Both the blood on the cigarette packet found at Scott's house and the blood on the knife found in the paddock were tested, and both came back as a match to Stacey Thorne. Then there's the case of the burnt clothing in the fireplace. Now, according to Scott's housemates, the fireplace hadn't been used in months because at the time of the crime, again, Australia was in the heart of its summer season, and that particular day was incredibly hot to begin with. Also, neither the housemates nor the police who showed up at the house at like 6 in the morning, neither of them, like none of them could smell any remnants of a fire within the last few hours. According to the housemates, they would often rip up old clothing, douse it with diesel, and use it as a fire starter. So to them, clothing found in the fireplace made sense. And that does make sense to me. I only ask, if Scott didn't burn his clothing, why wasn't the clothing he was wearing brought as evidence? Scott got home around 9:30 and was woken by police the following day at 5:45 a.m. I just don't believe that after getting home, Scott would have done a load of washing, especially after drinking all day. I could be wrong, but I have seen and read so much about this case involving the clothing, and not once did Scott or his defense team present the clothes that he was seen wearing in that video. To me, and I am absolutely not a lawyer, but to me, that's an easy thing to prove. But, you know, not that it doesn't seem like that ever happened. So the prosecution says that Scott burnt the clothes. So as the defense, you respond by, presenting the non-burnt clothes as evidence in court. Again, I'm not a lawyer. But they never presented the clothes. So either the clothing was never found or the defense team dropped the ball. I don't know which one we're looking at here, but could go either way. Again, I'm
Yeah.
not an expert. Now, is it possible that something was said about it during the trial, but it just has never been published publicly because I'm the only one hung up on this small detail of the clothing? Probably. But from what I could find, the clothing was never presented. And since Scott gave the wrong answer about what clothing he was wearing that night, the prosecution claimed Scott had purposely lied to the police, which, of course, in a murder investigation looks incredibly sketchy. Again, Scott spent most of that previous day drinking and was interviewed at like 6 a.m. when he was likely pretty hungover. So I don't blame him for getting it wrong. If you ask me right now, in this moment, and I'm sober now and I was sober yesterday, if you ask me right now, what clothes was I wearing tomorrow? I don't know. I'm absolutely going to get it wrong because my memory is simply shit.
You mean
But
what clothes did you wear yesterday?
Yep. Did I say tomorrow?
You did. I was going to say, yeah,
If
you don't know yet.
If that didn't also prove my point about memory,
I think that you've proven your point very, very accurately.
wowza. I can't even be like, oh God, it's so early in the morning. No, I can't even say this is my brain late at night. This is just my brain always. So yes, my point is, what shirt did I wear yesterday? I don't know. I guarantee I was wearing pajama bottoms, some kind of hoodie. 80% probably not a bra. It depends if I left the house yesterday. What day was yesterday? See, this is my point.
Yeah.
It's an easy thing, and he was very hungover, and it was very early in the morning, so I can understand him getting that wrong. But during the trial, the bloody footprints found at the scene were mentioned. A fingerprint examiner testified to say that there were 23 footprints at the scene, 12 of which were suitable for identification. There were also 17 fingerprints, but only 8 of them were suitable, and 2 were not identified. The defense asked the examiner if the unidentified prints had enough detail to make a positive ID. The examiner said no. The defense just didn't cross examine her further. Yeah,
That's interesting.
she's an expert, and they didn't ask about the footprints. Doesn't matter. Um, but that potentially burnt clothing and the bloody footprints kind of seemed to be very insignificant compared to the three key pieces of evidence: the Jim Beam can, the knife, and the cigarette packet. The prosecution added there was absolutely no evidence that any other person other than Stacey and Scott were at Stacey's house that night, and because of this, the jury quickly found Scott guilty of Stacey's murder. Scott was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years before being eligible for parole. He was around 35 at the time of his sentencing. Scott appealed his conviction multiple times but was continuously denied. According to his lawyer, quote, "The police were convinced in their own mind that Scott Ostick was the killer. It was a miraculous completion of a murder investigation in a really, really short period of time." So, does that mean that because the investigation wrapped up so quickly and so perfectly and everything was all, here's all the evidence you need, wrapped up in a tight little bow, does that mean that something is amiss? You'll find out after the break.
You heard the lady. Go grab another drink, hit the can, and we're going to be right back with more on the Stacey Thorne episode of True Crime and Cocktails. 2 on 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing the Stacey Thorne case here on the show. Before the break, Scott Ostick, he's been put into prison, but I feel like there's probably more to the story.
There absolutely is. And you'll be happy to know that on that quick break we took, I tried to think, what shirt was I wearing yesterday? And I was pretty sure it was my Key and Peele substitute teacher that lists all the students. I was pretty sure it was that shirt. According to the top of my laundry hamper, it was not. So
there you go.
Yeah, I wasn't that far off. No, I was far off. I was far off. Point is, memory. Oh God, I wish I could go back to when my memory was great. You know, back when I thought 50 Cent was talking about getting rough.
I get it. I get it. We all do.
Night and day, totally different. So, despite being found guilty in 2009, Scott Ostick continued to maintain that he was innocent. And while Stacey's family were relieved with the guilty verdict, Scott's mother, Robin, refused to believe it was true. She said, quote, "He wasn't a perfect angel, but he was never violent." In February 2010, there was a fundraiser in Perth for the launch of Justice WA, a group which aimed to have all wrongful convictions overturned. At that particular event, one of the key speakers was Reuben Hurricane Carter. Hurricane side note.
Thank you.
Reuben Carter, known as Hurricane throughout his career as a professional boxer. In June 1966, at the height of his career, Reuben was arrested for a triple murder that occurred in a bar in Paterson, New Jersey. Reuben and a second man named John Artis were arrested after police felt that they matched the description of the killers that was given by an eyewitness. The description was quite literally two black men in a white car.
Oh boy.
Keep in mind, 1966. So Reuben and John were cleared by a grand jury when the surviving victim failed to identify them as the gunman. However, 4 months later, John and Reuben were arrested again after the police magically found two new eyewitnesses who positively identified them as the shooters. During the trial, there was little to no evidence linking Reuben or John to the crime, and no motive, because they absolutely did not commit that crime. Not to mention those two eyewitnesses that kind of came out of nowhere. They turned out to be petty criminals who, after being arrested for burglary, were offered money and reduced sentences in exchange for pointing the finger at Reuben and John. Yeah, I mean, I kind of saw it coming that they would offer a lower sentence. Didn't see it coming they'd also offer them money.
Yeah.
But, Reuben, then, where are we? There we are. For the sake of time, I'll say both John and Reuben were found guilty and sentenced to 3 life terms each. John was paroled in 1981 for good behavior, and after a legal team tirelessly worked for years to get Reuben free, he was finally released in 1985 after serving 19 years for a crime he did not commit. So Reuben then spent the rest of his life advocating for those who have been wrongly accused. He died peacefully in April 2014 at the age of 76. Fun fact, he was portrayed by Denzel Washington in the 1999 movie Hurricane.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of chameleons, am I right? I don't know what's with me feeling the need to call various actors chameleons, but to me, that's the highest praise.
Yeah.
God. So, this event in 2010 that Reuben spoke at, it was attended by Scott's mother, Robin, and seated at her table was a man named Clint Hampson, a former police officer who was also a forensic scientist and studying to become a lawyer. Like, wowza. So, once Robin heard of the kind of work that Clint did, she pleaded with him to take a look at Scott's case. In his line of work, Clint says he comes across this all the time, where an inmate's loved one asks him for help. So he did agree to look at Scott's case strictly from a forensic point of view, but he said no guarantees that he's finding anything. Well, months later, while comparing crime scene photos, Clint discovered an inconsistency with the photos of the cigarette packet that had Stacey's blood on it. The packet, I remind you, was discovered on a table on Scott's back veranda. When the forensic team went to the house, they took both video of the entire scene and a series of digital photos. Based on the video that was taken on December 13th at 1:06 p.m., there was absolutely no cigarette packet on that table. But in digital photos that were taken December 14th at 6:31 p.m., the packet is magically there.
Mm.
And not just somebody placed it down, a couple things were moved so that it looked like it was always there.
Wow.
Meaning, someone placed that packet on that table at some point after the forensic team did their complete search of the house. That complete search took 2 full days. After realizing the inconsistency with the cigarettes, Clint said, quote, "That immediately put me on alert as to what else might be going on in this particular case." So Clint looked further into the evidence when he noticed another inconsistency: the empty Jim Beam can, which had Scott's DNA and fingerprints on it, that was found on the street in front of Stacey's house. But the area in front of Stacey's house was searched by officers on December 10th, and there was no sign of that can in any of those photos. The can was found on December 11th, around 7:09 a.m., about 12 hours after the initial search ended. According to Clint, quote, "That area had been searched the night before by no less than 5 officers of the Western Australia Police. Some of them were forensic officers. They conducted a thorough search and none of them identified or located a Jim Beam can." Then there's the case of the Excalibur brand folding pocket knife, which was found in the paddock between Scott and Stacey's houses. The paddock was searched on December 11th using a 10 to 12 person line search. which is a pattern used to thoroughly cover a large area. Teaching moment side note. So, there are 6 basic crime scene search patterns. The strip method involves the investigators walking back and forth across the crime scene, essentially going over the same path twice. The wheel method involves treating the crime scene like a large circle, starting from the center, moving outwards, like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. The spiral method starts at the center, and then you walk around, kind of getting larger in an ever widening circle. The zone method divides the crime scene into squares. The grid method involves numerous investigators walking at arm's length until they search the area multiple times, going different directions each time. And then finally, the line method, which the internet tells me is best for outdoor searches, is similar to the grid method, but in this case, searchers move in a single direction. For more information on crime scene investigation methods, do a quick Google search, or for the sake of LeVar Burton, take a look. It's in a book, A Reading Rainbow.
Thank you for that.
Shout out to LeVar for getting an entire generation of children jazzed about reading, and shout out to Tina Fabrique for that killer track that will be in our millennial hearts until the end of time.
Yeah.
Side note, fun fact, Reading Rainbow ran from July 1983 until November 2006. And in May 2000, the theme song was updated to a version sung by Shaka Khan.
Really?
I had no idea. Again, this is why I do this. Yeah. So I can drop Shaka Khan. You know, I've lost it.
I love that you're stone sober and you're making all my dreams come true.
What I realized, I don't think I even need the booze. I think mentally, like my brain is
Yeah.
just slowly mushifying, if that's a thing.
Thank you for mushifying. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is just what's happening.
Yeah.
And then it's me going on a tangent about LeVar Burton. Who again, LeVar Burton in like early 2000s, meow.
Hell yeah. I mean, look, I've spent a
Went
lot of
back
time
before
talking about
early 2000s.
I, what am I? I know. Listen, that's why am I glossing over that? I was gonna say we've spent a lot of time talking about Data and Riker
Sure.
on this show,
Yeah.
but I felt things about Geordie LaForge.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, I did. I'm not ashamed of that.
No.
I also used to
Handsome
put my
man and
headband
smart as
around
hell.
my eyes to, yeah.
Of course, do you know it was literally just a spray painted headband?
Was it really?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And
It
if
was always so
somebody's
freaky when they took it off, though, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And if somebody's going to come for me and be like, that's not what it was, this is it, then you don't talk to me. Talk to my husband. Because when it came on, he was watching it the other day and it came on and Jordy had the visor because he always does. I said, I went, oh my God, I had a headband that looked just like that, in 19 whatever. And he was like, yeah, that's what it is. It's just, they did it for the first season because they wanted a specific look, and that's the look they went with, and they just kind of kept it. So if it's wrong, he's wrong, not me. we're gonna go with that. But shout out LeVar.
Shout out LeVar.
So-
Absolutely.
So back to the case at hand, because eventually we always get back.
Mm-hmm.
So Western Australia police officers and specially trained state emergency service volunteers thoroughly searched that paddock on December 11th and found nothing. But the following day, while at the scene, a few detectives decided to head into the paddock for a quick smoke break when they randomly happened upon the knife, just lying in plain view. To be clear, the paddock was mostly gravel, So it would have been impossible for the search team to miss it. When the search team was told that some random detectives on a smoke break discovered the potential murder weapon, the team's response, and I quote, bullshit. I will also say, because I don't think it's written in my notes anywhere, is it customary? Because they were not there to go search the paddock, they were just at the scene doing something else. To just be standing around and go, let's go way over into that area to have a smoke break. You're already outdoors.
And if I may, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but
Yep.
if I may, they
Mhm.
just contaminated that crime scene, because if the crime scene was still open to being searched,
Mhm.
then them just going to stand there and have a smoke is contaminating the crime scene. Like if it was still, barred off or whatever the terminology would be, they contaminated it by going there just to stand and have a smoke. So I've got a lot of questions for this defense lawyer. You're right, because there is huge opportunities here
Yeah.
for the case to just get thrown out. The
100%.
first time it could have been thrown out. You can't this is I mean, listen, again, I'll save it because I have, trust me, lots more, but yeah, no, it the behavior makes no sense. And by the way, if they searched it on the 11th and then they said, "We've done it, we can't find anything, release the space,"
Yeah.
then it doesn't matter what they find on the 12th.
Great point.
In a court of law, it doesn't matter what you found there.
Yeah. Well, in that first trial, they didn't bother mentioning when things were found.
See, this is again,
It was during the search, but then they didn't specify that it was
aha.
they weren't really searching. But it's like, do you wanna look guilty, like maybe you placed something, than going out of your way to go somewhere to have a cigarette when you're already literally outdoors, which is nature's smoking area?
Yeah, great point.
So it's like, what are you even doing? I don't know.
Yeah, geez.
Again, the questions aren't gonna stop is my point.
No.
So if the knife was not there during the initial search, that means it has to have been placed there sometime between that search ending on December 11th and the detectives finding it on December 12th. So, just to sum up, the three key pieces of evidence, namely the cigarette packet, the empty can, and the knife, which were all used to secure that guilty verdict, were all conveniently discovered after those areas had been previously searched. When presented with this evidence, the Court of Appeal claimed there was still enough evidence against Scott to warrant him not getting just outright acquitted, but they agreed, based on this damning evidence, that Scott would get a retrial instead. The retrial took place in November 2020. The prosecution based their case on Scott's motive, their allegations that he lied to the police during his first interview about the clothing, and their belief that Scott had the opportunity to commit the crime. So, we're going to start with this supposed opportunity. Based on dogs barking and neighbors hearing moaning, it's believed Stacey was stabbed between 10:20 and 10:30 p.m. According to Scott's housemates, he was home at 9:30 and they saw him until he went to bed at 10:30. Now, assuming his housemates aren't lying to cover for him, that means Scott could not have been at the scene of the crime during the murder. So then there's the issue of the burned clothing. Even though the housemates and the officers who arrived hours later did not detect the scent of a recent fire, according to Clint Hampson's forensic research, he determined that the shirt remnants found in the fireplace were from a red back beer shirt, which features a red uh, part of the logo. And based on that CCTV footage, the shirt Scott was wearing that night had absolutely no red on it. The idea that Scott intentionally lied to the police about his clothing during that first interview I mean, I've already gotten into it, but Scott was incredibly hungover. I think it's more than possible he simply just didn't recall his clothing properly in the moment. After that interview, Scott's house was secured by police and he was never allowed to return to check for the clothing. So, did anyone check for the clothing at that house? Based on some questionable police work in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if the clothing was found and removed to help push this narrative that he had burned the clothing. During the retrial, the defense spoke about the key pieces of information, which seem to have been planted. During the time between the forensics team video and the appearance of the cigarettes, the house was constantly under surveillance by two officers at a time. Constable Farmer testified around 3:15 a.m. on December 12th. He was in the patrol car with Constable Spence when Farmer saw a light near the house. From their vantage point, they believed it came from the side of the house. It was only a few seconds, but it was enough that they got out of the car and went and looked. They got to the side of the property. They didn't see anything, so they just went back to the car. They did not enter the house. So it is possible that light was the sign someone entered that property and planted those cigarettes. The cigarette packet did come up during the first trial, but no one mentioned that a detective randomly found it, even though a forensic team had searched the house for 2 days and didn't see it. Then there was the knife that during the first trial was suggested to be the murder weapon. But what was not mentioned during the first trial was the knife couldn't have been the murder weapon. Clint Hampson brought in Dr. Richard Shepard, who has performed over 23,000 autopsies throughout his career. He even gave evidence in the review of Princess Diana's death in 1997. For more on that case, check out episode 24. I don't
Babies.
remember being that young. So, the force of a knife, if you're like if you're stabbing somebody, the force that you stab with can make the knife go deeper into the body than the length of the blade. But we're talking maybe 1 centimeter or about 10% of the blade's length, meaning a 10-centimeter blade might be able to make wounds that are 11, maybe 12 centimeters at most. According to the autopsy, some of Stacey's wounds were between 13 and 15 centimeters deep. Meaning the knife found in the paddock was not the murder weapon. And while it did have Stacey's blood on it, it also didn't have Scott's DNA or his fingerprints at all. I also question how to get Stacey's blood on it if it wasn't the murder weapon and if it was brought in days later. Where'd you get her blood? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Mm-hmm. So, the knife, again, found in the paddock by 3 detectives on a smoke break. Sergeant John Hendrickson officially was the one who found the knife. Also present that day was Sergeant Clinton Bragg, who said, quote, "As we were walking, it was an area that had been searched, so we weren't looking for anything. We were just talking. He just said stop, so we stopped. From recollection, I remember Sergeant Hendrickson saying, 'How could they have missed this?'" Bragg then added that it wasn't, he added it was unusual, but not uncommon for evidence to get missed during searches. And I'm sure that's true. But to suggest that it happened 3 separate times in a single investigation is outrageous. Bragg also happened to be the detective that discovered both the empty can and the cigarette packet, which feels, suspicious
Yeah.
a little bit, but also to put it on the searchers by being like, "How did they miss it? Ah, the boobs." Like, that's
Yeah,
extra shitty.
not
So,
great.
to be clear though, I am not accusing him of any wrongdoing. I'm just saying it seems like too much of a coincidence that all three key pieces of evidence in a case were quickly discovered by detectives and not by the forensics team who did the thorough searches that lasted hours or even days. Whereas these top notch detectives came in and within seconds found all this evidence they missed. Get out. I was born at night, but not last night. Not that I remember, but again, my memory is shit at this point. So, a quote from forensic expert Dr. Richard Shepard about Scott's case. Quote, "In 40 years, I've seen many things, but I've never seen such a blatant attempt to plant incriminating evidence in a case. I've seen evidence lost. I've seen evidence mislaid. I've seen evidence misinterpreted, but I've never seen such a blatant attempt to try to pervert the course of justice." During the first trial, the jury was specifically told there was absolutely no evidence that any other person was present in that house that night. However, 12 bloody footprints, a fingerprint, and a palm print were found at the scene. One set of footprints were determined to belong to Stacey. The second set and the palm print belonged to someone who wasn't identified.
Great.
They by someone I mean someone who was not identified, I mean not Stacey and not Scott. Which means there absolutely was someone else in the house on the night of the attack. Basically, if you take away the three pieces of evidence that were allegedly planted, there is nothing left that points to Scott as the killer. Yes, the baby might have been a motive, but based on the timeline, Scott physically could not have been there to commit the crime. Clint Hampson said, quote, "I have no criticism on the jury at the first trial convicting Scott of this crime. The case, as it was presented to that jury, appeared overwhelming." The retrial jury deliberated for 2 hours and 16 minutes before finding Scott Ostick not guilty. He was finally released from prison after serving nearly 13 years. Since his release, Scott has been working as a trades assistant in the mining industry and studying part time to get a university degree in health science. In 2023, Scott was awarded a $1.6 million compensation settlement for his time behind bars. In February 2024, Scott faced apparently some meth and cannabis charges, and he pleaded guilty the following month. I tried to get more information on that, but sadly, it was hidden behind a paywall of an Australian newspaper. I even tried to subscribe to that paper and pay for a month of it so I could read those articles, but they wouldn't let me because I don't live in that country. So, unfortunately, that's as far as I can go with the Scott update.
Of
But
course.
also, let the world read your paper.
Yeah.
Anyhow. After Scott's not guilty verdict, the Western Australia Corruption and Crime Commission, or CCC, said it would review the Court of Appeal findings specifically relating to police conduct. In 2013, they had stated, quote, "The commission has formed no opinion of misconduct with any public officer." Then in 2018, when the show Australian Story was filming episodes about this case, the CCC told them they were reviewing the Court of Appeal findings related to police conduct, which is funny because they said that 5 years ago and then said they'd found nothing, but they're just given the same story. Um, then in 2023, the commissioner of the CCC released a 104-page report to the attorney general It was a lot. That's not the point. Now, the report can be summed up by saying that the commission admitted that there were some major oversights in this case, but, ugh, happens, which is wild. The
Yeah.
report also stated, quote, with respect to any allegation that there was a failure by officers to disclose material or to misrepresent evidence at trial, that does not appear to be correct. So I guess they just decided that those three key pieces of evidence that led to Scott's wrongful conviction, they just magically appeared then, I guess. The report concluded with, quote, the commission has decided not to take any further action in relation to the complaint, other than to raise procedural issues with the commissioner of police. Accordingly, the commission now intends to close its file. So, over and done. So I guess they just didn't believe that any of the detectives involved did anything wrong, which makes sense why both Clinton Bragg and John Hendrickson had since been promoted to senior sergeants since all of this happened. Hendrickson, of course, has since retired. But again, I'm not accusing them of anything. I'm just saying it's incredibly suspicious. But if, and I'm speculating here, if that evidence was planted, what was the reason? To me, there's only two possible reasons. Either one, they believed Scott was guilty, but knew they didn't have enough evidence to convict him, or two, the police know who truly was responsible and they framed Scott to protect that person. As of this record, the police have still not reopened Stacey Thorne's case. Her family is rightfully upset. They said that for years, the police asked them not to speak to the media as it might jeopardize any court proceedings. And yet, here we are almost 17 years later, and the family is still waiting for justice for Stacey. Her family hired private investigator Robin Cotman in the hopes that Robin can help get the case reopened. The fact that it wasn't automatically reopened when they found Scott not guilty is wild to me. But Robin has publicly stated how disappointed she is in how the police have handled this case. She said it feels as though Stacey's murder has been swept under the rug. Robin then made a full report of suggestions as to how the police should proceed with the case. To be clear, Robin is a former police officer. This includes she believes they should offer a reward for new information, retest any blood evidence, and test a swab that was taken of Scott's laundry room door, which does not appear to have been tested before either of the trials. I don't know what the swab is of. It's from the door, but I don't know what it was, but it didn't seem to get tested at all.
Right.
Another suggestion from Robin is for police to, I don't know, look into other suspects. For example, Stacey's estranged cousin, Denise. Now, according to a documentary that I watched, when police first canvassed the neighborhood and asked if Stacey had any enemies, multiple neighbors said Denise. Apparently, Denise and Stacey hadn't spoken in years because Denise had accused Stacey of sleeping with her boyfriend.
Interesting.
Now, I don't know how accurate that is. I don't know what boyfriend we're speaking of. But during the first trial, Denise testified that there were at least 3 confrontations between her and Stacey, and 2 of those incidents got physical. But if Denise and Stacey hadn't spoken in years, what would be her motive to kill Stacey now? Well, apparently, Denise and Scott had some sort of sexual history.
Here we go.
And on the night of Stacey's murder, after Scott was refused service and he left the pub, he went to Denise's house first. But she wasn't home, so he went to Stacey's. And to that I say, Stacey deserved so much better in every possible way. Denise testified during the trial that she may have been the one to tell police to search the paddock for the knife. The detectives who actually found the knife denied that Denise told them anything. Denise claims on the night of Stacey's murder, she was home and in bed by 10 p.m. However, a witness claimed Denise showed up at his house at 10:30 p.m. and randomly asked him for matches. At the time, this witness lived about 70 meters from Stacey's house. When interviewed by police, Stacey said her brother woke her up at 7 a.m. to tell her about Stacey's death, and she immediately ran to Stacey's sister's house to comfort her. But a witness said at 6 a.m. that day, Stacey was at a roadhouse 11 kilometers outside of Boddington, waiting for it to open. She told the employee she needed fuel because she was going to visit a family member out of town. So, was she outside of town waiting for a business to open at 6 a.m.? Or was she at home and her brother woke her up at 7 a.m.? Because those feel like conflicting statements to me. But Denise was never investigated. Her timeline was never looked into, and her fingerprints and DNA were never taken to compare with those discovered at the crime scene. I'm not saying Denise was involved in Stacey's murder, but I am saying it feels like the police immediately believed Scott was the killer, and then they just refused to look in any other direction. And that is how this case has ended up unsolved after nearly 2 decades. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Stacey Thorne deserved better. Reporting for True Crime and Cocktails, I'm Christy Oxborrow.
What a twist at the end. No one saw this coming. My God. Quarreling cousins, something we're not familiar with.
There was
On
that one time.
Listen, we were children. It was bigger than us. Let's take one more break, hit the can one more time, grab one more drink, and we're going to be right back with our final thoughts on the Stacey Thorne case on True Crime and Cocktails. Right, final clap on 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing the Stacey Thorne case. What a wild ride.
Yeah.
Wild ride. I got to say right away, the fact that they lived in a place called Boddington, shout out to friend of the podcast, Ashley Bodding, because every time I heard Boddington, I thought of her and I felt like I would be remiss not to mention this.
Oh, the entire time throughout the whole thing, I was like, yeah, I kept thinking I was saying her name instead of saying the town. Like I thought I had screwed it up and I was like, did I say that right? I don't know.
Listen.
Yeah. The whole time.
I hear you.
The whole time.
And shout out to her father, Harvey Bodding. Just had a birthday.
Hey.
How about it? Happy birthday to him. Okay. Where was I? I got into my shout outs. All right. To me, this feels like one of those classic, like, just because you're not a good guy doesn't mean you're a murderer situations, which we do hear from time to time. Already to me, this revelation at the end that he may have seen Denise or excuse me, gone to Denise's house before going to Stacey's house is interesting. Because what bumped me from the beginning is he's 12 drinks deep.
Yeah.
Around 10 beers, the couple of bourbons. He says at 7, he gets kicked out. 7:15, he goes to Stacey's house. They chat, they have sex, they chat again, and then he leaves around 9:30. I was like, this woman is pregnant with your baby. And you've been together, according to him, for 18 months.
Yeah.
First of all, I get that they live 350 meters from each other. They're very close. They can walk. I get that
Sure.
completely. I also get that sometimes people snore, especially if they've been drinking. Perhaps they didn't want to share a bed that night, whatever. But it just bumped me. I was like, that's a year and a half into a relationship where your partner is pregnant
And he went home
and
instead
he
of
went
spending the
home
night.
and he's that drunk. Most people would just roll over and fall asleep. Like,
True. I mean, the thing for me was so many things were like, she was killed by her boyfriend. But there was so much where they were like, "Oh, they did not say boyfriend, girlfriend." It
yes,
was
that was going to
that
be
was they were lovers, which
right.
I can I just say that word normally? I
Lovers.
can't I have to go with it, lovers.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I'm a mess of a human. Um, but to me, it's also like I mean, you do you, whatever works for you relationship-wise. But it's like after being pregnant for 5 months, you didn't think, "Fine, put a label on it."
Well, and it's interesting because one could argue, were they on bad terms because he asked her to get an abortion? That would be fair. But they were on good
Sure.
enough terms for him to go over and for them to hook up. And
Yeah.
and to me, the only thing that it proves is the disconnect. So the fact that it bumped me, I was like, when I heard this at the end, and it was like, well, he went to Denise's house first and then went to Stacy's house. I was like, okay, so like I said, it feels like perhaps this is not necessarily a super serious relationship, or he didn't view it as one.
Sure.
So of course, that's also putting him under the microscope in this kind of crime. I mean, the partner usually is the first suspect, as we know.
Yeah.
But certainly if there's that level of disconnect. Because when you think about it, it's like if he didn't commit the murder and he had just slept there, she may not have died and he wouldn't have gone to jail,
That is true.
right? So again, it's like it's just interesting to me that it's one of those things where it's like your fear of commitment is what, I'm not blaming him, obviously. That's superfluous, but it's just funny that it's like that chain of events changed both of ended her life potentially. It may have been
Yeah.
ended either way, but it's just so interesting when it's like the smallest moment, the butterfly effect, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it's odd to me the timeline of she died at 10:45, but the call wasn't made until 11:15.
Right?
That's weird. And that's another place where I'm like, have they been all properly interviewed? Has that all been gone through?
I
Is the
assume not.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like this necessarily has a real high bar for
Accuracy.
accuracy. Then I also just had to say this whole thing about like him saying, "I'll do anything for you not to have this baby because my ex said she won't let me see my kids if Stacy has this baby." First of all, I don't believe him as far as I can throw him.
Sure.
Is it fact that she said that? Who knows? And then if it is, then what I would say to him is grow up because we all know that unfortunately, if things are that volatile, you're likely going to have to go to the courts to deal with custody, in which case, no judge on the face of the planet is going to say, yeah, she can withhold you seeing your children if you have a baby with someone else. Doesn't work that way. And we all know that. So, first of all, again, I'm not vilifying his ex because I don't necessarily believe that she even said it. But if she did, to me, it's just like she can say that all she wants, but there's nothing that's legally going to allow her to do that to him. So the
Correct.
idea that he would then say, I need you to get an abortion because of this is to me, it's just more vile because it feels like he's pitting two women against each other. When the truth, to me, this is a complete allegation, speculation, but truth to me is that it sounds like he just didn't want to be in a relationship with her and he didn't want to have a baby with her.
Oh, it seems like he heard pregnant and immediately was like, "Well, now I'm locked into a relationship. I just got out of a
Right.
long-term thing. I'm not interested. I wanted casual. A baby's not casual." And it's like,
Right.
but
He may have
it
just,
didn't seem like she was pushing you for more. It was just like, I'm letting you know,
right.
and that's it.
Right. It
But
almost feels like he had almost, could have made the assumption that she wanted more when maybe she didn't.
correct. I mean, also, I'd love to believe the police interviewed the ex just to ask, like, did you say anything? Not that it would make up for what he had said to Stacey, but it's like just to see, is he making things up because he didn't want to be in a relationship?
Well, that's my question exactly. And yes, that that was exactly my point is that it was like, was his ex interviewed? Who was interviewed in this case? Like it feels like it's like real scattershot.
Yeah.
Now the clothes. The
Yeah.
clothes that he was seen wearing on the CCTV footage that were
Yep.
never brought up in court. And to your point, it's like it feels like it would be easy to produce the clothing that he had worn 8 hours prior.
100%.
It feels we know later that the burnt clothes in the house weren't those same clothes. So we
Right.
know that the clothes in theory still exist.
Yes.
And it would only behoove the defense to produce them.
Yeah.
I offer you this because we know that the house had been searched, he wasn't allowed to get back into the house, etc.
Yep.
Did those clothes go missing? I.e., they were recovered, there was no blood on them, and that didn't fit in to the narrative,
Well, I'm convinced that had to be it
right?
because otherwise there's no reason those clothes wouldn't have come up.
And so then the defense was likely scared to bring up that they don't know where the clothes are because it makes it look like
Like he got rid of
he
them.
got rid of them, when in reality, they should have brought it up.
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, again, what we know now, that's another nail in that coffin.
100%.
Wild. Um, the fact that they said no one else could be proven to be in that house, but there was footprints and a palm print that were absolutely not Stacy's
Yep.
or Scott's.
Yep.
I mean, I could see why you wanted to cover this case. Okay. You're gonna love this. The murder was December 9th, correct?
Yes.
Why is the video that's being taken of the crime
Well,
of
of
his
Scott's
house,
house. Yeah.
not the crime scene, but of his house, why did it take 4 days?
If they locked it down immediately at 6 a.m. the following morning on the 10th,
Exactly. And then
I
it
don't
took them
know.
4 days to get somebody out there with a phone. I wanna remind you, this is 2007 with a
Yep.
camera rather. But the point stands, everyone has a phone. Like, you couldn't this just feels like detective work 101. Like, you have to search these areas immediately.
Immediately.
And even if they got him out of there, they got the roommates out of there, they locked down the house, I don't need to explain to you that 4 days, there's a lot of room for even if the house was under surveillance the whole time. It
Yep.
just feels again like that's a large amount of time to go by. Then I would also
100%.
offer, why were they making the second video the next day? If they've gone through and made the video,
Yes.
I'm no expert. Why would they need to make a second one of the same thing?
From my understanding, they did the video, and then after they were at the house the following day, the one detective was like, "Oh, hey, did you notice that?" And they were like, "No, we didn't." So they took pictures and then took the cigarette packet in.
Excuse me, yes, it was pictures the next day.
Yeah.
Well, again, this is absurd.
Yeah. Like I don't even know what it is. I'm trying to think of what it was almost like there was a large battery on the table and it moved completely out of the way to put that bloody cigarette packet, like, pretty noticeable.
Yeah, it's wild to me that the defense didn't
Push
pick
harder.
up on that because
Oh, yeah.
that feels overt to me, but just saying. Um, Then again, the can found 12 hours after the initial search had ended.
Yeah.
It's the fact that all 3 of the key pieces of evidence were not found until after the fact. Like, to me, again, like any good lawyer, I've watched enough
Mm.
SVU. You know, Casey Novak, she's getting this thrown out. This isn't even going to
Sure.
trial. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
it's wild to me. Again, if it was one of the pieces of evidence, I'd be
Of
like,
course.
"I don't know." But I guess but all 3 of them? The 3 things that are gonna, like, knock this out of the park, all were found by detectives randomly after very, very thorough searches. And then they turned around and blamed the searchers, being like, "They missed it, don't know how." It's like,
Cops on a
"Because it
smoke
wasn't
break
there."
finding a knife laying there in plain sight. Come on.
Oh, 100%. It's
No
just,
way.
like, out there doing nothing. Like, it's so noticeable. They wouldn't have missed it.
And the other thing I would offer too is if his roommates say that he was home with them and that they were with him until 10:30, if they were all lying, the police likely, if they interrogated them early enough at 6 a.m. the next day,
Right.
they would have no idea when her time of death was. So it would have to be a wild coincidence that they were like, he was with us until 10:30. Right? Like
Yeah.
again, like they wouldn't have been able to. I don't think that the police, my hope would be that the police wouldn't have said she was killed between 10 to 20 and 10:30. When was he with you? Like, right? Like
Oh, especially that early on, yeah.
when no one would have known, like to me it just feels like even if they were lying for him, how would they know when to lie about? Unless they didn't question them for days and then that's a whole other kettle of fish. But if that at least went as it should have gone,
Right.
because he was immediately a suspect within 8 hours.
Oh, yeah.
To me, they're
Oh, yeah.
also gonna be pulling those roommates to ask about his movements the night before, in which case, yeah, he can't have committed the crime.
Yeah.
That to me is just like it's if it's also multiple, it's one thing if you get one there's one your alibi is with one other person. Are they
Right.
lying or are they not? But if it's multiple people, then it starts to break down. It gets to be very easy to catch multiple people in the same lie, right? So,
100%.
yeah, I just again, all of these details are fascinating to me. The fact that her blood was found on the knife, but none of his DNA or prints were.
Mhm.
But we know that there was prints of his found at the crime scene, right? Which again could have been because he was in the house. We know that they had sex.
Right.
So his fingerprints are probably going to be on the door handle or
Somewhere in that house for sure.
somewhere in the house. Um, then to me, it's like, why would he put on gloves before pulling out the knife? What happened to the gloves? This man, to your point, was
Mm.
intoxicated. And granted,
Yep.
350 meters away, which I did a quick Google, around a 4-minute walk, less if you're walking fast, more if you're walking slow.
Sure.
I just I don't know that he would be conniving enough. Look, maybe he can hold his liquor very well, but like 12 drinks deep, I don't know that you're really like thinking about how you're committing this murder and like being careful.
Right?
I think you're probably going to be a little sloppy.
Oh, 100%. Especially you're gonna drop a knife that has none of your DNA or fingerprints on it, but you're also gonna drop a can that has both.
It
Like,
also feels like
it why would he do one and the, like, how could both of those happen?
yeah, great point. Great point. Um to me, just pulling this out of nowhere as a, pure speculation, if it were me, not that I would have done anything that he had done, but if it were me and I was in a day drinking place and I wanted to keep drinking and then, whatever, when I get home, probably going to have a nightcap. So it feels more than possible he could have drank a can when he got home in that hour he was chatting with his roommates before he went to sleep. I don't know. Is it possible that if people had access to the house and the garbage that they could have found that even in his bedroom?
Right?
I'm known to take a nightcap cocktail to bed, especially if you're, like, in it, right? Like, you're
Yep.
not necessarily thinking about brushing your teeth and doing your normally nightly routine. It's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go
Sure.
lay in bed and watch TV till I fall asleep immediately." I mean, again, like, to me, there's just so much opportunity to procure these items.
100%. And that knife, I think it it didn't have Scott's fingerprints or DNA. I don't think it had anybody's fingerprints on it, which nothing screams more planted than a
Yeah.
knife that only has the victim's blood on it, no fingerprints whatsoever. It's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, get out.
Get
You're
out.
lying."
Somebody is. That's
Yeah.
for sure. That is
Oh, 100%.
that's a fact. Um, and then finally, this total blindsiding piece of information about Denise. Here's what I'm just gonna speculate after hearing this for the first time, broad strokes.
Sure.
First of all, my first question is there a record of text messages between Scott and Denise?
Oh,
Because if Scott, speculating, was sleeping with the both of them at the same time, knowing that there was some kind of bad blood between the 2 women, I would
mhm.
go out on a limb and say it's feasible that he kinda liked the drama. So,
Oh, sure.
it's possible he went to Denise's house, she wasn't there. He's like, "I'm gonna go to Stacy's." What's he gonna do drunk on the walk over? He's gonna text Denise and say, "Just went to your house. You're not home. Oh, well, I guess I'll go to Stacy's." That's gonna piss her off. She's God
Sure.
knows where, what her alibi was because she was never interviewed, which is absolutely insane. Um, she gets off work or gets done with whatever she's doing. She marches immediately over to Stacy's house to confront to the both of them or even him. Stacy's like, "What are you doing here?" We know that they've had fights escalate to being physical before.
Yep.
Bam.
100%.
It's such an easy to me, I think that this is what's so fascinating about this case to me is that it's like, it's so easy to poke holes in all of the evidence as you've
Yep.
masterfully laid out, but then it's also very easy to find another suspect that had surely motive, opportunity, a past history of violence with the victim. It really does feel like they just got their blinders on, um, regarding Scott, and then it was not even looking into anyone else. And here's the
100%.
thing, this ultimately, at the end of the day, the burden is on the defense lawyer. The big thing that you hear talked about a lot, again, I'm no expert, but you hear defense lawyers talk about this a lot, well, on both sides, that if it wasn't your defendant, if it wasn't your client, you need to provide an alternative. It's like
Yeah.
a huge part of like the burden of whatever it is, not the burden of proof, but like if you can't provide another person that could be a suspect, regardless of what the police have done, then you're
Right.
probably not going to win your case. And here's a great example. But this, if they had gotten into it, the fact that multiple people interviewed in the area were like, does she have any enemies? Absolutely, Denise. Uh, I don't know if I'm a defense lawyer. That's probably where I'm going to start.
100%.
Finding out that they had had physically violent interactions in the past,
Yeah.
wild.
And to your point, what if he's seeing them both at the same time? Denise doesn't know about it. Maybe Stacy didn't know about it either. And maybe you're right. He goes to her house. She's not there. She finds out that night that he went to Stacy's. She shows up, and that's when she discovers Stacy's pregnant. She's going to be enraged, especially if she thinks that Stacy had stolen a previous boyfriend.
Right.
Then it's like, oh, then she's going to already be angry.
It could be heat of the moment. Because also
100%.
let's remind, because they got so fixated on the other knife, as far as I know, we don't have a murder weapon.
We don't.
That murder weapon could have come from Stacy's own home. It could have been a
100%.
kitchen knife, right? Like there's absolutely nothing. Now you'd think that again, if they were fully searching the premises, then they may say it appears that there's a kitchen knife missing. But again, we're not. I think we've already proven in this case that it's like we can't trust any of the search information.
No.
So yeah, I mean, the other thing I want to point out, and then I'll let it go. This is dark, but I think it's important. Okay. Stacy is stabbed 31 times, I believe
21.
you said. 21?
Yeah.
21 times. That's first of all, crime of passion. We know that. That's anger,
Sure.
that's rage, that's all of these things. I don't know about what size Scott was, but also we know that he's been exonerated for the crime at this point, so it likely wasn't him. You don't often hear a lot about someone who is the victim of these kinds of crimes getting away and running away and dying somewhere else.
Sure.
First of all, God bless her and her intense will to live. How fucking beautiful. Good for her that she was like, I got to try and get out of this. What I would offer, again, I'm being very blunt and very dark. If it was a man who was the perpetrator that was bigger and stronger than her,
Sure.
would she have had the ability to get away? Maybe. Was she potentially left for dead and then went? Maybe. It's just interesting to me hearing now that it was potentially another woman. Again, I don't know any of these women's sizes. I don't know how big she is. She could be
Right.
6'2". Who knows? But it just feels interesting to me as a detail in terms of building the possibility, speculating that Denise could have been the perpetrator. If I could wrap my head around she's able to slip away from someone that's closer in her to her in size.
100%.
She's able to fight that person off easier than an attacker that's significantly bigger than her. Right? Like, again, we just don't
Mhm.
see that. That's a detail to me that it's like, we don't see that a lot. Does it happen? Absolutely.
Sure.
When we talk about the cases where people have been stabbed that many times, they're not typically getting up and running away.
Right.
So, A, again, I think it speaks to her will to live and her bravery, all of those things, obviously. And also, I would just also put it in the pot where it's like, it's going to be easier for her to fight off someone that's the same size as her than it's going to be potentially that someone who's bigger.
True. I am fascinated to know, did it happen and then the killer had a moment of like, "Oh my god, what have I done?" and left, and then she left on her own? Or like what happened in that whole situation?
Well, absolutely. That is completely plausible. Completely plausible. Um, we need to see the forensics, right? Because again, it's like, was there pooling of blood on the floor? We know she had a ton of defensive wounds. So that's saying she
Yeah.
fought like hell. We know that's true.
Yeah.
Um, is there, you know, are there knife marks on the floor, right? Where it was like
Oh, sure.
more slashes that maybe didn't actually make contact. Like these are all questions that if we had now, granted, I know we're in a very small town, so again, it is what it is. Um, but that's it. That, to me, that's like another piece of this puzzle of the mystery. What was that actual crime scene like? What do we know in terms of was there pooling? Like, did she lay there for a while before getting up? Because that could also change the timeline.
Sure.
If the stabbing happened between 10:20 and 10:30, but then she's dying at 10:45 in this person's arms, was she out of the house at 10:30 or was she out of the house at 10:40?
True.
Right? Like these are the fascinating. I mean, truly perplexing because it just feels again like it's so close to being solved to me. It feels like it's so close to or at least being I mean, it should be reopened.
Oh my god, yes. And imagine what it would have looked like if they were like, "Okay, we'll look at Scott, but we also have to look at other people."
Which again is how it's supposed to go.
Right?
Yeah. Certainly by detectives, but then certainly by a good defense lawyer. You gotta dig in if it isn't him. And by the way, if the lawyer knows it isn't him, if he's like, no, I'm telling you the truth, you gotta find another possibility.
100%.
Well, listen, Christy Oxborough, fantastic work as always. Again, I can see why you wanted to cover this case. Truly perplexing, truly confounding. I hope that one day there's justice for Stacey and her family because it feels again like there's a real opportunity here for that to be possible.
Right? It
Yeah,
seems like it's doable, but it's just such a slap in the face to not reopen it. Automatically reopen it when the guy was found wrongfully convicted.
absolutely. But again, when we see these reports coming out saying there was oversights, but then also the people had gotten a promotion, it feels like
Mhm.
again, you never know.
Gross.
Yeah, you can say that again. We thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this wild ride. As always, if you haven't already, give us a follow on the socials on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at True Crime and Cocktails, on Twitter at Not Detectives. If you'd like some bonus content, some more chucklehead fun chicanery, go over to patreon.com/, True Crime and Cocktails to learn more about our subscription-based service over there. And of course, the only place for official True Crime and Cocktails merch is, of course, truecrewmerch.com. So check that out as well if you're interested. Christy, do you want to tell the people about next week's episode?
On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Gareth Williams.
Another one I'm unfamiliar with, and I couldn't be more jazzed, as my shirt says, about it. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Oh, good night, 50 Cent.
Good night, Geordie LaForge.